From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Without further ado, Alejandro Danois.
Thank you, Emilio, for that awesome introduction. That gentleman's name was Gary D. Howard, who was working at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel at the time. And that was a really pivotal moment for me when I ran down the escalator to talk to him, because he asked me, "Can you do that every time?" And I said, "Does a bear defecate in the woods?" "Yes, I can." So that's awesome. I didn't know anyone else knew that story, that he shared that story. So, Emilio, thanks for bringing back some awesome memories. The Boys of Dunbar was a 10-year passion project for me. I'll give you a little bit of background of how this thing started. Initially, it was a magazine story idea that I sent to a very prominent magazine. I sent a 2 to 3 paragraph pitch to a gentleman, and he got back to me and said, "Yeah, I really like this, but we're not going to use it because I think you have something so much bigger here." And he put me in touch with some people who were veterans of the publishing industry, and they said, "Wow, this is a wonderful idea. Are you up to taking a 2 to 3 paragraph magazine proposal and turning it into an 80-page book proposal?" And so from there was just off and running. The seeds of this story were planted way back in 1982 for me, and this was around the time that this team was accomplishing some magnificent things on the basketball court. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and there was a basketball court directly behind my building, and we were basketball enthusiasts, junkies, morons, whatever you want to call it. We were out there every day. If it was snowing, we were shoveling snow. We not only played, but we debated and we argued, everything that's basketball related. And for people in here that are familiar with folks from New York City, we were loud, we were arrogant, and we thought we knew everything. So we're 12 years old, and we're talking about our favorite players from New York and why New York is the king of basketball. So we're talking about Bernard King for the New York Knicks, who was our favorite player at the time. We're talking about Julius Erving, the great Dr. J, who was from Long Island, who we loved. Tiny Archibald, the only player to ever lead the NBA in assists and scoring in the same year. Guys by the name of World B. Free, Vinny the Microwave Johnson. We're even going back to Bob Cousy, the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. If you were lucky enough, you saw him wandering the halls. He's here today. And we're talking about all of these players, and there are older neighborhood superheroes that we're watching and we're seeing play in these great playground tournaments. There was a guy in high school by the name of Chris Mullin who was awesome. We loved Chris Mullin. Our personal hero was a guy by the name of Dwayne the Pearl Washington, who was significant in turning the Big East Conference and Syracuse University basketball into the phenomenon that it later became. There was a guy by the name of Walter Berry who went on to become the National Player of the Year at St. John's, leading them to the Final Four. These were guys we saw around the neighborhood and playing, and there were other guys our own age who we were hearing about. There was a guy by the name of Kenny Anderson, and we called him Kenny the Kid or Kenny Ice, who was tearing up the youth playground tournaments. There was a guy by the name of Malik Sealy, the great late Malik Sealy. And all of these other players. We heard about these brothers in Coney Island called the Marbury brothers, Norman and Juju and a bunch of other ones, and little did we know that their younger brother, Stephon Marbury, would go on to surpass them all. And so we're having this conversation about how great New York is, and there's an older gentleman who lives in my building, and he was probably in his young 20s. He was an excellent playground basketball player, and we used to go watch him play, and he said, "Yeah, New York's the king of basketball, but the greatest team I ever saw was a high school team from Baltimore called Dunbar." And so we are watching the Philadelphia 76ers and Dr. J and Larry Bird with the Celtics and Magic Johnson with the Lakers, and we said, wait a minute, the greatest team you ever saw is a high school team from Baltimore? And he goes on to explain every player on the bench is going to play Division I basketball. They have the #1 high school player in the country by the name of Reggie Williams. Wait till you get a chance to see him in college. He's 6'7". He can play every position on the floor. He can block shots. He can rebound. He can shoot jump shots. He can pass. He's marvelous. He's unbelievable. But the crazy thing is, he's not even the best player on his own team. So we're scratching our head and saying, okay, the #1 high school player in the country is not even the best player on his own team. Yeah, right. So who's the best player? And he says, you're not going to believe me. Come on, man, who's the best player? He says, all right, the best player is a 5-foot midget, and his name is Bugsy. He called him Bugsy. And we thought he was lying. We thought he was playing with us. A couple of years later, I'm watching this innovative cable network with the idea of 24-hour sports programming called ESPN. And I'm watching a Wake Forest University basketball game, and I see a 5'3" athletic marvel unlike anything I've ever seen before by the name of Muggsy Bogues. And I screamed to no one in particular, that's Bugsy! And so I was in prep school in Massachusetts at the time, and there was a player by the name of Reggie Lewis at Northeastern University who was phenomenal, unbelievable, tearing up the college basketball scene. And I heard that he couldn't even start for his own high school team. So I did a little digging, a little bit of research, and found out that he attended Dunbar High School with this guy named Muggsy Bogues. And so the light bulb went on, and I started to think about this team. Reggie Williams and David Wingate were at Georgetown University at the time, at the apex of the phenomenon known as Hoya paranoia. They delivered John Thompson's only national championship, and Reggie Williams, as a freshman at Georgetown, was the most valuable player, the most outstanding player in the Final Four when they defeated an incredibly talented Phi Slamma Jamma team from the University of Houston that featured future Hall of Famers Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, and a number of others. Reggie had 19 points and 7 rebounds in the final game. And to think that the year before, this guy was in high school just boggles the mind and tells you how exceptional he was. And so this idea had been marinating for a while, and then we fast forward to me merging my passion for the written word with sports and deciding I'm going to tell this story. And we rewind to the magazine pitch, to stretching it out to become a book proposal. And the long story, short version is spending 10 years putting this story together. And I initially thought I was embarking on a basketball story, right? Story of perhaps the greatest high school basketball team of all time. This is the story that I'm going to tell. And so I buried myself in the archive rooms at the Enoch Pratt Main Library in Baltimore on Cathedral Street. And I said, I have to find out what was going on. I have to look at these games. I had to see who did what, put that together. But I also said, I need to read the newspaper from front to back to find out what was going on at the time. And so it wasn't until I actually started reading what was going on in the city and around the country that I realized this is a basketball story that's not even about basketball at all. And so we look at what was going on in the early 1980s in Baltimore at the time, and we found this once proud city really struggling. And there were some forces that were really laying siege to this once proud community. Through the head coach, Bob Wade, we kind of get the story of his parents being part of this great northern migration. They were from a very small town called Dillwyn, Virginia, down south. And as we know, the agrarian economy had ground to a halt. And a lot of African-American people were in search of the so-called promised land. And Bob Wade's parents were emblematic of the people who left the tobacco fields and the cotton fields down south in search of the promised land. And Baltimore happened to be one of those promised lands because due to the World War II economy, they had iron foundries and steel mills, the great Bethlehem Steel Complex, car factories. They were hiring people for 3 shifts a day. You didn't have to have a high level of education in order to get a job there. And the economic prospects were so much better in cities like Baltimore and other cities that people migrated to. So people were able to get a decent union wage, and they were able to purchase homes. And they used to scrub those marble steps in front of those row homes in East Baltimore with pride. And they dreamed of sending their kids on to college and having a better life for them than they had. And so when we fast forward now to the early 1980s in Baltimore, where the book takes place, we find that there is the loss of that union wage. The way that people were accustomed to making a living and dreaming was no longer a reality. And so Bethlehem Steel, as I found out as I was going through the newspaper archives of the Baltimore Sun and the Baltimore News American, were laying people off at an astounding rate. The General Motors plant was laying off people. The iron foundries, the steel mills, the jobs disappeared because the economy changed. And within that, we also had the onset of the plague of crack cocaine at the same time, which ravaged the community. Baltimore had long been a town that was dominated by the heroin trade, and the drug business was always big in Baltimore. But there was a very big shift in the early 80s. There was a federal drug task force that took out all of the big-time kingpins around the heroin trade. These guys were older businessmen. They were very smart. They kept it away from schools, from the outdoors. The inventories were regulated. They ran it like a real business. When those guys got taken away, some gentlemen filled the vacuum, and they realized that there were loopholes in the city's juvenile justice system. And so what happened was they said, if an adult gets caught with my stuff, I've got to pay lawyer fees. They're going to go to jail for 10 to 15 years. If a kid is younger than 18 and he's caught selling my stuff, he's going to go to a juvenile detention facility, and the next day he's going to be home with mom and grandma. So they started recruiting teenagers into these drug armies. They created this new business model called the open-air drug markets, which ran 24 hours a day for 20 years. And so when you have this army of undisciplined young people fighting over this business where the profit margins are so astounding, you have teenagers with a stupefying amount of semi-automatic weapons, random gunfire, a destruction of the community, and all of this stuff happens around the time where this great high school basketball team comes together. You have the head coach, Bob Wade, who is a product of Dunbar High School. He grew up in East Baltimore. He himself was a product of a single-parent home. And so he went on to get a college scholarship to play football, played in the National Football League for the Washington Redskins, the Baltimore Colts, the Denver Broncos, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. But he was also cognizant of the fact that he had some wonderful mentors and role models who helped him. And while he was in the National Football League, he came back every summer to work on his teaching certification. And his goal was to make an impact on the young lives of athletes in the same way that his role models did for him. He was the valedictorian of his graduating class at Dunbar. His mother worked in a textile mill, and she always told him, get your education, be serious about your degree. I don't want you working in a textile factory like me. And he took that responsibility seriously. And so when he's the head coach at Dunbar and this team comes along, he is adamant that they are going to take care of their academic responsibilities. And so he ran the program very much like you see the elite college programs run today. At the end of school, practice did not start at 3:30. Study hall started at 3:30. He recruited teachers and professionals from the community to serve as mentors and tutors. They would work with the kids around their schedules, time management. Okay, you have a test coming up on Tuesday. You have a quiz in this class on Wednesday. You have a paper due next Monday. And they helped them really get an understanding of how to handle the academic rigor that they were going to need to abide by when they got to college if they were going to stay eligible. So sometimes practice didn't start till 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, until the last textbook got closed. And this was a time where there weren't distinctions on how long you could run a practice. And so his practices were brutal. They practiced holding bricks because he could not afford a fancy weight room. And we talk about the economics of what was going on at the time in the community. He would drive around to these dilapidated buildings and just pick up these bricks and wrap them in duct tape. And the guys would actually practice their drills sometimes with bricks in their hand. Sometimes a basketball never got bounced in a 3 to 4 hour practice. They worked with sandbags, with backpacks filled with sand that they ran around with on their back. And the philosophy behind that was no team will be in better condition than we are. So when you look at Wade's story, and again, his family being emblematic of that great northern migration, now we look at this collection of talent that we see on the basketball court. We mentioned Muggsy Bogues, the 5'3" athletic marvel who could dominate a game without scoring a point. I thought I knew everything there was to know about basketball, and when I saw him play, I did not realize that that was possible. We have already seen a reasonable facsimile of the person that everyone thinks is the greatest basketball player ever in Michael Jordan. I think it's safe to say that Kobe Bryant came pretty close to being a reasonable facsimile of Michael Jordan. I believe we will see 10 more Michael Jordans before we see another Muggsy Bogues, because his talent was so rare. He was a one-man fast break, defensive dynamo, pressing machine who could alter the landscape of a game simply with his leadership and defensive pressure. We talked about Reggie Williams, the #1 high school player in the country, who won the national championship at Georgetown. David Wingate, whose mother was paralyzed and had never seen him play a game of basketball until his final high school game, championship in the Baltimore Civic Center, 8,500 people, standing room only. He says he wanted to go to the University of Maryland. That was his dream. And when John Thompson walked into his living room, his mother said, "You are going to play for this man." She knew nothing about basketball, Patrick Ewing, Georgetown. You're going to play for this man. Reggie Lewis did not start for the Dunbar Poets, and he goes on, let's think about this, to become the best NBA player out of all of them. He supplants Larry Bird, Hall of Famer Larry Bird, as the captain of this legendary Boston Celtics franchise, and unfortunately passes away at the age of 28 due to a heart defect. His mother had a heart attack when she was 15. His brother was born with a small hole in his heart, had multiple open heart surgeries. There was a medical history of heart problems in his family, and very sad that Reggie passes away at the age of 28. But he did not start for this high school team. And so to think about what he blossomed into and what he became, the lazy narrative is that, man, this guy wasn't even good enough to start for his own high school team. That's not true. Bob Wade said he thought about starting him, but there was the starting center by the name of Tim Dawson, who went on to become the Atlantic 10 Rookie of the Year at George Washington University. He later transferred to finish his college career at the University of Miami. Tim Dawson right now is probably the most successful out of all of them. He went on to get a PhD and was a principal at a number of different school systems in Florida, in Baltimore, and in Maryland. And Tim Dawson was a very strong, physical basketball player. And he could block shots, could jump out the rim. And when he slam dunked the ball, he was trying to rip the rim down. So think about this from a psychological perspective. You're getting your brains beat in by 40 points. Tim Dawson is dunking all over you, grabbing every rebound, blocking every shot. When he goes to the bench, the other team takes a sigh of relief and says, woof, now we got a chance. In comes Reggie Lewis, and they get better. Unbelievable. It speaks to Bob Wade's acumen and the psychology to be able to convince a player of that talent to come off the bench and not start. And so this team was not a team that was recruited by some super scout. When we see these great prep teams today, like Oak Hill Academy, like Montverde Academy in Florida, they're not only recruited from all over the country, they're recruited from all over the globe. Ben Simmons, the most recent #1 pick in the NBA draft, phenomenal talent, went to Montverde. He's from Australia. The shooting guard on his Montverde team was from Louisville, Kentucky. The point guard was from Florida. We'll never see a team like this of young men that grew up with each other, playing in the back alleys on milk crates when the older guys would shoo them off the courts. They ate at the same dinner tables. They competed with and against one another at the neighborhood recreation centers. They were in the Dunbar gym as little children. They knew all the cheers. They knew all of the fight songs. And they were just little kids excited to be part of this great institution because Dunbar, like the very strong African-American churches in Baltimore that played such a pivotal role in the community, Dunbar was similar to those other revered institutions. So Muggsy and Reggie Williams were the best of friends from a very early age. They were nicknamed Mutt and Jeff because out of a 24-hour a day, they spent 16 of them together. Reggie was tall and skinny. Muggsy was short and squat, but you always found them together. No one knew what type of potential they had. They were riding their roller skates together. They were playing baseball together. They were playing football together. They were at the local recreation center playing checkers and dancing and listening to music, doing arts and crafts activities. Before they even showed a hint of athletic potential, these guys were cohesive. And when people saw the embryonic relationship that they had on a basketball court, Muggsy could come, look away from the basket, throw an underhand alley-oop. Everybody would say, what in the world did he just do? Reggie would come flying out of nowhere, grab it, slam it through the rim. People would run out of the stands. They'd never seen anything like that before, and they could do that and communicate with one another without saying a word because from the age of 5, 6, and 7 years old, they had this relationship. So it really is a basketball story that's not about basketball. It's about community. It's about love. It's about mentorship. It's about family. And it really is about how this team that created this majestic sense of artwork through this sport of basketball on a basketball court gave a struggling community hope because people were being laid off. You had the drugs really decimating the community. And for those 2 hours that you were in that Dunbar gym, it was the cheapest entertainment ticket in town. You could forget that you didn't know how you were going to pay the rent. You could forget that the Baltimore gas and electric bill had a turn-off notice. You could forget what drugs were doing to the family. You could forget that you didn't have any food in the fridge and you didn't know how you were going to get groceries. And for those 2 hours, you were part of a show, and they made you smile, and they made you feel magnificent, and they gave you hope that something good could happen. So I know we only have a few minutes left, and I did want to open the floor up to some questions. So how does it work? We go back to a microphone and ask a question?
Excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Did any of the players come back to Baltimore to try and make it a better place after their basketball career?
Well, the funny thing is when you look at the trajectory of these guys, even the guys that went on to the NBA, they became coaches. And so maybe not necessarily coming back to Baltimore, there actually is the young man considered one of the greatest coaches in the country right now on the prep level. Probably the best coach in the region is a young man by the name of Herman Tree Hareed. He was nicknamed Helicopter for folks that are fans of Syracuse University teams with Derek Coleman and Pearl Washington and Ronnie Cycli and those guys. He came back, and he's the coach at Lake Clifton now and has coached some excellent teams. Muggsy went on to become the head coach of the Charlotte Sting in the WNBA. He coached at United Faith Christian Academy in Charlotte. Reggie Williams was a coach at a number of high schools and junior colleges and community colleges. He operates his own basketball academy now, I believe, out of Bowie or somewhere in that region. So it's really interesting to look at all of the guys who went back into coaching and wanted to make an influence on young people through the sport because of what they got from Coach Wade. Thank you for your question.
How you doing?
I'm great. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Just kind of blown away by the overview, the historical overview. I grew up in West Baltimore.
Okay.
And so spent a lot of time both at Lafayette Courts and Flag House growing up. And I think oftentimes what's kind of absent from that East Baltimore story is that there were so many guys that were even better than Mugsy and David Wingate and Reggie who never even played high school basketball because of the failing educational system in Baltimore. I'm just interested because I grew up in Baltimore, you grew up in Brooklyn. Wanted to hear you share some of your impressions of the neighborhood because most of the sections of East Baltimore where Dunbar is located, these neighborhoods look the same way now than they did 30 plus years ago with a backdrop of having, Johns Hopkins Hospital in the center of East Baltimore, one of the most prolific, health institutions in the country, yet those neighborhoods in East Baltimore where Mugsy and Wingate and all them played, these neighborhoods still look the same, 30 plus years ago. So I'm just interested in hearing your perspective.
Okay. I'll touch on the first part of your question. I don't think I'm credentialed enough to really talk about the socioeconomics and the politics of why things look the way they do today, but you make a very valiant point, very valid point. I loved what you said, though, about the great talents that didn't make it, because there are minor characters in this story that really speak to why these guys made a pact with one another to hold each other to a high standard. And I'll give the example of the greatest player ever from the history of Baltimore. As much as I love Carmelo Anthony, I'm a long, struggling Knicks fan. Carmelo's going to the Hall of Fame. As much as Sam Cassell accomplished winning NBA championships in the NBA, the greatest player from Baltimore is a young man by the name of Skip Honey Dip Wise. He was 6'5". He was every bit the talent of a Jerry West and an Oscar Robertson. But heroin, drugs, and crime took him off of his path. Skip got a scholarship to go to Clemson University and became the first freshman in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference to be a first-team All-ACC player. That tells you how good he was. But his decline was precipitated by becoming addicted to narcotics, falling into crime. Instead of his name appearing on the back page for his headlines, his name was on the police blotter and on the front pages of the paper because of his arrests and the things that happened to him. And Mugsy and those guys saw Skip and said, Skip was better than everybody, and he fell down. We can't let that happen to us. So there is a great lineage of some miraculous players from Baltimore that you've never heard of who were phenomenal talents that got caught up in this great plague of drugs. Thank you for your question.
I don't know how far you follow the key characters after Dunbar,
Bob Wade went on to Maryland and was not a successful experience. Do you cover in the book, or can you talk about what happened there to take him off the path that he was on?
Well, the book really focuses on the 1982 season, and we kind of gloss over 82, 83. There is a mention of Wade's experience at Maryland, but it's really not an exhaustive look. And I think, I think it's time that he kind of told his story from his perspective on his experience at Maryland. And one of the things that is really unfortunate is that because he was not successful at Maryland, for people who have a passing interest and they hear that name, they think of Bob Wade, high school coach, in over his head, failed at Maryland, and cheated. But I think his legacy is so much bigger than that when you look at the lives that he impacted, the hundreds of lives. There are over 100 kids that he coached in either football, basketball, or baseball at Dunbar that went on to get athletic scholarships to college. And they felt like he was a father figure to many of them who didn't have a father figure in their lives. So we touch on it a little bit at the end where we say, hey, this is where they are now. But I think that's an entirely different story.
You go back to high school coaching in Baltimore?
He actually came back to Baltimore, never coached another game of basketball, but he became the director of athletics for the Baltimore City public school systems and oversaw all of the athletic programs for all of the schools in the public school system. He just recently retired, and they had a big ceremony at Dunbar. A lot of the old players came back, and they named the court after him. Thank you for your question.
Great presentation. I'm a Brooklyn guy also. Hats off to Brooklyn. Have you ever gone back to Brooklyn and worked with some of the kids or the community where you lived?
I do go back. My mom is still in the area. My family is still in the area. So I try to get back once every few months. I live in Maryland now, but fortunately I'm only a 3.5-hour drive and 2.5-hour ride on the Amtrak. So I do get back quite often, and Brooklyn looks a lot different than it did. I tell a lot of people now that say, hey, you know, I was in your old neighborhood. I say, yeah, that was dangerous when I was growing up there. But I'm happy that mom can walk around the corner and eat at a Thai food place and sit outside with her friends and not have to dodge stray bullets.
What part of Brooklyn did you grow up in?
I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I lived in Starrett City, East New York. Mom is now in Fort Greene, Clinton Hill area. Thank you.
Hi, I haven't read the book yet, but I was curious to know if the players, did they play AAU basketball during the summer? And if so, were they on the same team? And if you've seen that that's different to the way it is now, where sometimes players are just sort of divided between their AAU team and their high school team?
That's an excellent question, and we touch on that in the book because the climate is so much different today. The AAU structure is dominated by the sneaker companies, the apparel companies, and this large outlay of cash. So today, your prestige is defined by what team you're playing with. Oh, I'm on Team Mello, or, you know, I'm on this team, I'm on that team. You'll find that there are teams where the star player is a kid from Texas or California. Well, how is this kid playing on a New York AAU team, right? Back then, the most powerful person in high school basketball was not Nike, not Under Armour, not Adidas. It was a gentleman by the name of Howard Garfinkel, who ran the 5-star basketball camps. And so what would happen was Coach Wade would put these guys in a van. They would drive up to Pennsylvania to participate in these 5-star basketball camps. The director of the drills and the teaching was a guy by the name of Bobby Knight. Young coaches who were still in high school at the time, begging for a college job, like Dick Vitale, a number of other coaches, Rick Pitino, John Calipari. These guys were high school coaches who were up there running drills and trying to learn. So picture Bob Wade driving a van up to 5-star, and all of these long-limbed individuals get out the van. Howard Garfinkel runs up to Wade, and his nickname for him was Sugar, and he'd say, "Sugar, I hear you're keeping all these secrets down in Baltimore." And so Howard Garfinkel and Wade actually almost got into a physical confrontation because when Muggsy was at the camp, he was not a national prospect. No one knew how good he was. And so there were a number of point guards at the camp that had these national reputations. So they would have a draft. And Bob Wade picked, because of the numbers that got picked out of a hat, he picked the worst center. And in lieu of that, he was granted the first pick of the best point guard in the camp. And he picked Muggsy. And Howard Garfinkel lost his mind. He said, "Sugar, you can't do that. You can't take this kid. You got to pick the best guy." And he says, "I did pick the best guy. I know he plays for you in Baltimore, but nobody's heard of him. He's a midget. You can't take him." Wade said, "I'm not only taking him, but he's going to be my horse." And in five-star terminology, a horse was every player had to play at least half the game. You could designate one player as a horse that could play the whole game. And that was reserved for guys like Patrick Ewing, Ralph Sampson, Len Bias. No one had a 5'3" horse. So they had to be separated. And Garfinkel says, "You're screwing up the camp. Do what you want to do." And Wade says, "I bet you I go undefeated and win the championship with Muggsy." And Garfinkel says, "You'll never win a game. It's a bet. I'll take you to dinner if you win one game." Muggsy destroyed every point guard at that camp. Tommy Amaker, the great coach at Harvard now, who was a phenomenal point guard at Duke University, said he saw Muggsy tear up the top-rated point guard in the country, did not sleep the night before he had to play against him. And for the first time in his career, he was talking to himself when Muggsy was guarding him, saying, "Keep the ball tight. Don't let him steal it. Don't let him embarrass you." And after that camp was when Muggsy became a national phenomenon. And in Howard Garfinkel's five-star report that he sent out to all of the top college coaches, he gave Muggsy a 5-star rating, which was the highest rating you could give, and he only gave that to elite players that could dominate in college. And in the comments section, he called Muggsy the greatest peanut since Planters. It was a different time.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. How are we doing on time? 2 minutes left. I think we got time for one more question.
Don't be shy.
One more question. If you're not near the mic, stand up and get it in. That's a separate topic. I mean, to me, I'm sorry. He said, can I speak about it was just a strictly basketball question that's kind of off topic. Can I speak about the legacy of Len Bias? From a basketball perspective, Len Bias was the greatest player I saw in the Atlantic Coast Conference. He was in the same conference at the same time as Michael Jordan. And if Len had not passed away, we might be talking about Air Bias right now because he was that good. His death and the controversy really brought the drug culture that was destroying America to the forefront of a national conversation. It became the hottest topic in the corridors of Congress. There was some knee-jerk reactions and some laws that were put into place, which kind of resulted in low-level drug offenders receiving longer sentences than murderers. You know, there's a very deep legacy to Len Bias, but one of the saddest things for people from this area who saw how brilliant he was, and it really made us change our perception of drugs because we thought that it was just the junkies outside, and we didn't realize how prevalent it was. And we didn't realize that if it could touch this beautiful, angelic young man who had such a beautiful future ahead of him, who was gifted by the basketball gods in ways that not many other people were, then that was a sign on the highway that this problem was really, really, really bigger than we had anticipated, and was going to be kind of really ugly when we saw how it manifested. So I've got to wrap it up. I really want to thank everyone for taking the time. I know Shonda Rhimes is speaking at the same time, and I was mad at myself for speaking at this time because I wanted to go check out Shonda. But you guys could have been anywhere today, anywhere at this festival, and I'm really, really humbled that you chose to spend a few minutes with me to learn about this book. It was a passion project, 10 years in the making. I'm really excited to release it. It's much bigger than basketball, and I hope if you do read it that it touches you. I'm not going to sell the basketball short. For basketball junkies, the basketball action is great, but there's so much more to it. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.